Good afternoon. My name is Medina Karimova. I'm Purdue Northwest graduate student at the Department of Communication and Creative Arts. Today is 23rd of November 2019. We're here in Hammond campus with Dr. Jeff Shires, Associate Professor of Communications at Purdue University Northwest. So, hi Professor.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Today I'm going to ask you some questions about your experience at Purdue University.
Okay.
So, where did you study communications?
I got my bachelor's degree and my PhD from the University of Missouri at Columbia. My bachelor's degree was in radio, TV, film. My PhD is in communication, although my specialization was in media and cultural studies. And then I also got my master's degree in basically media down at Indiana State in Terre Haute.
So when did you start your career at Purdue Northwest?
I got here in 2002. When it was at the then Purdue University North Central campus.
Could you tell me about your disciplines and areas of professional expertise?
What do you want kind of a wide understanding of communication, or do you just want what I'm doing within the discipline?
Yeah, what are you doing?
Okay.
Discipline?
A lot of my research focuses on the mass media and how people interact with the mass media, and how in that interaction helps to shape and change and modify that person's sense of identity or selfhood. I come at it primarily through the theories of Mikhail Bakhtin, who was a Russian thinker. I look more at the earlier theories, which are based upon some German neo-Kantian philosophy, but looking at the place of the individual within the world, how the person finds himself within the world, and how the person interprets the world through interaction with all the elements around him or her. That has since moved on to social media. The question kind of has changed over time as I've moved from the mass media to social media. The question that I've been looking at in the last 2 or 3 years is, how has social media hurt the development of a person's self-identity? What are some of the things that can cause that to be cut off? What does that mean both to the person and to the world at large?
So does have a connection with like interpersonal communication?
Not really. It's more of a philosophical basis, and so I'm not necessarily looking at the relationship between individuals per se, but I'm looking at the relationship from the point of view of the person who is going out into the world. So, for example, when we're sitting here across from each other, I can see things about you can't see about yourself, right? Right now, you can't see your face. You don't know what's behind you. You have that same ability on me, right? It was called surplus of vision. I can see more towards you than you can see. You can see more towards me than I can see. Now, how do we work, or do we work together in order to overcome that? Do we try to approach the other person as a subject, as an individual, or are we approaching them as an object, so that I look at you and I think, okay, I see someone from Kazakhstan. I see someone who's a graduate student. I know everything about that person. That would be closing them off. But if you look at them in an individual and you say, okay, they've had experiences that I haven't had. They can see things that I can't see. We can interact dialogically. We can interact through discourse. We can interact through writing. We can get a better understanding of ourselves from the other, and the other can get a better understanding of him or herself from me if we act ethically towards each other. Now that's kind of a face-to-face meeting. But there are other types of interactions we have. For example, we read a book. The book, when you encounter a book, what you're encountering is not necessarily the book, but you're encountering an author's consciousness. So you're reading the book and kind of creating an imaginary other which is looking back at you. So you take all this input in, and you sort through it, and some of it you look at value systems. So you sort through it, you figure out what you accept for yourself, figure out what you don't accept for yourself, and then try to create a sense of the individual. When we get into trouble is when we start looking at everything as an object. When we start looking at other individuals not as people, not as having rights in themselves, not as an equal participant, but we look at them as an object, as a thing, and we kind of freeze them off. And then what does that do about my relationship to the world? And then how does that affect me? How does that stunt the formation of my own self-concept? Because if I don't think you have any information to share, that you're just an object, I can shut you out. It kind of freezes you. So that's kind of the long explanation of about 600 pages of writing.
And it's all based on like Bakhtin's?
It's all based upon Bakhtin and a lot of the neo-Kantian thinkers, and especially from the Marburg school. Actually, Bakhtin was exiled in Kazakhstan for a while.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know about that. But we learned his theories in Kazakhstan. Yeah, I recognize his works. So when you worked as a faculty chair, what was the most difficult merger between Purdue University North Central and Purdue University Calumet unification?
That was 2 years. That probably aged me about 10 years. Because it was an extremely stressful time, because we had a limited time period in which we had to get things done. So that probably was the first things that we were always up against the clock, trying to get all these things made.
Which year it was?
I want to say it was 2014 to 2016. Or 2000. It's either 14. Was it 13? No, I think it was down. No, it was 14. It was 14. It was 14 through 16. Because there were hundreds of decisions that had to be made on the academic side, and you always had to try to strike a balance between a number of different constituents. Because you have the faculty at the North Central campus, you have the faculty at the Hammond campus, you have the students at the North Central campus, you have the students at the Hammond campus. So as we're trying to work through things like trying to decide programs, for example, academic programs, what are we going to keep? What are we not? What are we not going to keep? How are we going to make these two very different sets of curriculum match? And trying to negotiate and trying to trying to keep the negotiations on an even footing so that everyone who came to the table kind of had an equal say to it. That, and sometimes having to basically say, no, we're not going to do it that way because we think you are trying to bully your way into something. We're not going to do that. Here's how we're going to do it. The biggest thing the Senate had to work with, the two Senates had to work on, was the Constitution. Because we had to come up, both institutions previously had their own faculty constitution, which talks about the faculty powers, faculty responsibilities, and how we did that. I mean, you would think the two campuses that were in the same university system would be somewhat alike. We did everything about as drastically different as you could. Primarily because the Hammond campus had a lot longer history. The Hammond campus had been academically autonomous for a longer period of time, and so they really had over time evolved into this Constitution. North Central, we got academic autonomy 2005, I think, 2006. And so at that point, the faculty developed the Constitution. So our Constitution hadn't had as much time to evolve. It hadn't had as much time to change. We hadn't, these things change as you encounter problems, right? So you have something that the Constitution doesn't address that comes up. You get through it, and then you go back and you say, okay, the Constitution has to address this. We have to have a way to handle this next time. We hadn't had that situation, so we had to negotiate. The two campuses had to negotiate a new constitution. The two campuses came up. The committee that was charged with doing this came up with a document. That document passed the North Central Senate, and it went forward for a vote of the faculty at the North Central campus. The document at the Hammond campus never came up for a vote. And so at the end of the first year, we had one campus that had passed the Constitution and one campus that hadn't yet. So the second year was then going in and trying to reconcile and try to figure out a document that would pass both campuses. And so that was negotiated on a much smaller committee. The first one, I think we had 10 people on it, and so to get to the first draft. The second time when we negotiated the changes, it was myself, who was chair of the Senate, my vice chair, which was John Schwartz, who is now the associate vice chancellor of academic affairs. Harvey Abramowitz, who was the Hammond Faculty Senate Chair, and Jeff Schultz, who was the Hammond Faculty Senate Vice Chair. So it was just the four of us sitting down with someone who kind of moderated the discussion. We got that through. That passed both Senates. That passed both faculties, and then that got enacted. But that was pretty much an 18-month straight process. There are other things that we had to do. We did a chancellor search in that time, which we brought together a committee of folks both from the two campuses and from the Purdue system to work and to find candidates to be chancellor, which we forwarded on to the president. At one point, well, during 1 year, I was on 20 different committees. probably about 2/3 of them related to unification.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about things like salary structure, talking things about branding, various search committees. It was an extremely hectic time. We got, I think we got enough done that we were able to move forward with kind of the provision that we would work some of these things out as we went along. And now to this point, we are still trying to work out some of those issues that had to get kicked down the road a little bit, because at the time we just didn't have time to handle them. So I think we've been together now. I mean, it's been one campus now for over 3 years, but we're still having to deal with some of the decisions that need to yet be made.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this situation kind of reminds me of our country. This year, we changed the name of our capital.
Okay.
To after our first president's name. It was Astana, and then it became Nur-Sultan. But a lot of people, they think that it was unnecessary change because there were a lot of money put in this Astana branding,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's like all of this efforts is like became unnecessary.
Right.
So,
I mean, among the faculty, you had really 3 different camps.
mm-hmm.
You had one camp who said that if we handle this right, this could have some really good outcomes for the students. We had another camp that said this is going to be bad for whatever campus they were on, and there's going to be a set of winners and losers that are going to come out of this. It's going to be bad. And there are some that question the very necessity of even going through this process.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, in that group, kind of the same thing. Why are we doing this? We put so much money in both of these campuses. Why are we bringing them together? This makes no sense. And some of it was based upon that. Some of it was based upon procedural. They didn't think that the faculty or other constituent groups had been contacted or worked with ahead of time enough, and so that a lot of the input that they would have put in at that point was kicked out. They never got the input that they needed, and so faculty input especially seemed to be devalued. But there were some major fights in those camps.
Mm-hmm.
North Central, we surveyed our students, and the Senate, working with student government, basically asked the students for their opinion of it, and it kind of broke down into some people thinking that this could have some real big advantages for them as students. Others who were worried about what was going to happen, and especially what was going to happen with the North Central campus.
I found information that you were named Executive Director of the Concurrent Enrollment Program
Mm-hmm.
for Purdue University Northwest. So what are the official duties for that position?
Concurrent enrollment was one of those issues that was a hot button on the Hammond campus during unification.
Mm-hmm.
The North Central campus had developed a fairly robust concurrent enrollment program where we went out and we worked with the high schools. Departments would look at the high school faculty, determine whether or not the high school faculty were qualified to teach the course, and if they were, the course could be taught at that high school with that faculty member.
Mm-hmm.
There was assessment that we did the same assessments that we did on campus that we did in the high schools. So there was a fairly robust system. It had its problems. certainly has problems. And one of the issues on the North Central campus is that people felt that this should be under faculty oversight. It wasn't over faculty oversight. On the Hammond campus, there was great distrust of the system. They didn't necessarily see the checks and they didn't necessarily see the processes that went behind it. They basically looked at it as a way for North Central to increase its enrollment and to use it as a cash cow when it really wasn't making that much. It wasn't making hardly any money. But they decided that once unification was set up, the administration, the senior leadership, once unification was set up, that they needed someone in that position, a faculty member in that position to oversee it.
Mm-hmm.
So my job was to basically go in and oversee the process, check out the processes that were in place, check out the processes for approving instructors, make sure that those were on the up and up, make sure that the processes for doing evaluation and doing assessment of the programs were in place, make sure that things were running as they were supposed to be running, and also to kind of increase students' connections in the high schools with Purdue Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
For the first part of that, I basically went in and I started looking around, and yeah, there were problems. There were problems that were happening. And so I worked especially with the departments and said, here's what I'm hearing from you. Here's what I heard. You tell me what's going on. Mm-hmm. And some department chairs felt that they were making recommendations to one of the people in the office, and that person wasn't listening to them and then going ahead and doing what they wanted to do. So I had to then come in and say, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to follow the process that we have, and we're going to follow it to the letter. I came in and found a lot of the paperwork was outdated, so we had to go through and we had to redo all the paperwork. We brought students onto campus from the high schools. We brought them in for a half-day program where we had them come in. They got to sit in a couple of classes with students on campus. They got to participate for example, the chemistry kids got to participate in the chemistry lab. Mm-hmm. Students who were taking English came in and sat in on an English composition course. And then we brought them over for lunch, and we had faculty come and talk to them during lunch. So that if they had questions about programs, they could answer them. So we were trying to develop some tighter connections with the high schools. There was controversy with the faculty senate. At the same time that I assumed the office, the Higher Learning Commission came out and said that all faculty in the high schools had to have the same credentials as faculty on campus to be able to teach. They allowed for a 3-year transition period to try to get people, 3 or 5, either a 3-year or a 5-year transition period to get people up to speed, so they could get the credentials that they needed. Our Senate decided that it didn't want to do that it wanted to say they either have it now or they don't have it, and passed that resolution, which caused a major drop within the number of students that we have and the number of schools that we interacted with. And so at that point, it was my job to go out to each one of those schools and tell the principals, superintendents, and whoever what was going on and who would qualify and who wouldn't qualify under the new rules. And they were angry. Um, they were angry at the university. They were angry at me, which was fine. I was the one there. They made threats against us about various things. And I basically it was basically go out, talk to them, tell them what was going on, get their input, and bring it back to the provost, which is what I did. And so I did that for a year, and then Ann Gregory, who is the director for the School of Education, came in, and she was appointed to that office, and I at that point stepped down.
So now you have classes in Westville also, right? So do you have the same amount of classes in Hammond at Westville campus?
No. The only classes I teach at the Hammond campus are the graduate courses. So I teach a graduate course. Like I taught one last fall, and I'm teaching one this fall. That's the only class that I have on the Hammond campus. The rest of my courses are at Westville. In the spring, I'm scheduled to teach all my classes at Westville.
Oh, but in Westville you have undergrad.
Yes.
Class, right? What do you think about the distance of two campuses?
The distance is, I can't speak now. The distance is a problem. The distance is more of a problem for Westville because more students travel from Westville to Hammond than from Hammond to Westville. And a lot of students really have a hardship with that.
Why is it like that? Why Hammond campus students don't
there are more courses offered over here. Right now we are hovering right around 2,000 students at Westville, and there are like 8,000 here. So just naturally, you can't have as many courses at Westville for 2,000 students as you have for 8,000 students. They're just not gonna make, right? So there are more classes here. The shuttle service, the students do not find the times convenient. They do not it doesn't really match up with the schedule. A number of our students are working full time, so gas becomes a problem to get from one campus. If they have to come to Hammond every day, the extra mileage from someplace like LaPorte can be a problem for them in financially. It's always been a problem. I think the idea of the shuttle service is good. I think the financial reality of the shuttle system really is what's holding everything back, because if you only have a group of 2,000 going in one direction, you're not getting as many riders as you could if there was more back and forth between the two campuses, so that maybe 800 students were going this way, 1,000 students coming back the other way. It might be a little more feasible, but right now the students do not believe that the shuttle system is effective.
But since you're a graduate director, I think you still have to come here for the next semester.
I live halfway between the two campuses. I live in Lake Station, so it takes me, depending on traffic, it can take me about 20 minutes to get here and maybe 25 to 30 minutes to get to Westville from my house. So for me that's not bad, because I leave here and I can be when I leave our class on Tuesday nights, I can be at home in 20 minutes. So for me, if Now I have a colleague that lives in LaPorte, and that would be pretty much an hour drive for him. So one way. That it becomes a lot more difficult for him to take on responsibilities at the Hammond campus than it is for me. Like I said, I live partially between the two of them.
Okay, the last question is, what's your best memory at Purdue Northwest?
Best memory, as chair of the faculty senate, one of the things that I got to do was I got to be grand marshal for graduation, and I got to be grand marshal for the first graduation ceremonies that we held in the Work and Activity Center, which was the first time in like 25 years that we had graduate students on the North Central campus. Normally we went to Valparaiso and Valparaiso University and used their facilities. But since we got the new activity center, we had room, and so we got to have the graduation ceremonies on the students' home campus, and that was a big deal. And I got to lead the parade by holding up the Purdue University has a ceremonial mace. For graduation ceremonies, they always the main campus always sent the mace up in a padded. Basically, they sent it up in its own car, in a padded case, had someone guarding it at all times, because this thing's a historical relic. And so I got to use that, and you walk up and you put it in the holder at the front of the auditorium. You wait till everybody gets seated, and then I got to turn and say, Chancellor Dworkin, the candidates for graduation are assembled on the North Central campus, which got a big raise. And then I got to go sit down and watch the rest of the ceremony until the end of it, when I got to go up, pick up the mace and walk out. That's quite fun. That was very entertaining. That's probably my best memory.
And thank you for taking your time.
Certainly.
For this interview.
Is that what you needed?
Yes.